partnering with Blue Zones and has developed a course in connection with cooking. And I can also attest from personal knowledge that he's an extremely good paddler and one of the strongest people you will ever find in the water. So with that, Scott, it's you.
Well, welcome. Thank you for having me, Ian. This is great. A little bit about me. I'm going to kind of give you a little history of my career and what I've been doing, and then a little bit about a relationship with Dan Buettner, and tell you who he is and how we became involved with him, and the course that we developed with him with our company called Rouxbe, and then the future of what we're doing with Dan Buettner, and then a little bit about cooking techniques that I could share with you for living to be 100 years old. So a little bit about my career. I've been a chef since I was in my early 20s. I did spend almost a decade with the Culinary Institute of America in Napa Valley as a chef promoting sustainability, health and wellness, and world cuisines. I was managing with a team about 10 different conferences a year at the Greystone campus, the New York campus, San Antonio, and Singapore. And we were partnered with Walter Willett of Harvard School of Public Health. And the message was culinary and nutrition. And we were promoting this to operators around the country, in addition to global companies like Unilever. And I'm sorry for where I'm at. My internet's down at home, so I had to go to the nearest internet, which was Starbucks. So partnering with Walter Willett, promoting culinary and nutrition through different programming, Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives. That's where we brought 400 doctors in a year to a conference to teach them how to cook and bring them into the kitchen, teach them about nutrition, teach them about whole foods, things they might not have got in their education. So when they're then working with their patients, they're not just prescribing medicine off the top. Let's talk about diet. So my career has focused around diet as a way to live longer. That was my time with the Culinary Institute of America. I did spend some time with a startup in San Francisco where we were working with Google, and I spent almost a year consulting with the Google food team to help them determine the minimum offering standards for all of their global menus. So they feed 70 to 100,000 people a day around the world for free, and they wanted to make sure that their standard menus were plant-based. And this term plant-based or plant-forward means mostly plants, less animal protein. So this message around eating has been with my career for a long time. So spending time with Google food team, and now with a company called Rouxbe, and it's Rouxbe. It's roux, flour and butter to come together, bean. So our founders started this about 15 years ago to codify cooking in an online presence so that it could be used by global companies, hotels, retirement communities, culinary schools to supplement the education or the training that they're already doing. So as my position now, Vice President of Culinary with Rouxbe, we develop and promote courses for classical cooking, for the Marriott's, plant-based cooking for consumers and other entities, which brings us to where we are with the Blue Zones. So we were lucky enough to start working with Dan Buettner about a year ago with the concept of bringing his message, which is eat to live 100. And Dan Buettner, if you don't know his history, is a photographer, and he worked with National Geographic for many years. And in traveling the world, he discovered that in some of the areas he went in Greece and Italy, Japan and Okinawa, he developed the concept that there's 7 zones around the world that he's noticed in his travels where the general population is living to be 100. And he wanted to determine why. So he dove into not just what they're eating, but their lifestyle. So he developed this concept called the Power 9. And this is all around community, movement like exercise, that they're naturally exercising in the world, food, drink, spirituality. And with all that, food is a major component, and what they eat and how often they eat. So taking from that, we developed this course to highlight the different regions around the world, what he learned within those regions, talking to the elders and seeing their diets, and then providing recipes around those diets. All the recipes that we've done with this course are all vegetarian. There's no meat products involved. So in general, the Blue Zones diet will promote a plant-focused, a plant-heavy, a plant-forward, a plant-based diet. There is some meat involved, but the course that we decided to write was all vegetarian. And it was based on his latest book that came out about 4 or 5 months ago called The American Kitchen. This is one of 6 to 7 books that he has. And he's a well-known entity by creating the concept of the Blue Zones. This is just the beginning of a longer-term relationship because the course is the initial course that we're providing to the consumer. And then we are moving forward. I work in the space of enterprise, so the professional clients. And within Rouxbe, our online courses are used 50% consumer, 50% professional. And we're moving forward with this Blue Zones concept, not just as this course to promote a better way to eat, but as a way to share with the enterprise, the Marriotts, the Four Seasons, and incorporate this into their training. So the training that we already provide them on classical techniques from knife skills to food safety, we're also going to incorporate the training on food as medicine, which I'm very passionate about. And this is one avenue who has, and Dan has a great following so that we know that Blue Zones will be kind of recognized as the way to cook. So I will take questions after. I just wanted to give you an overview of my experience in the industry. I've always been focused on the farm to table, the cooking for health. One of my first restaurants in 1995 in Seattle was kind of the beginning of the so-called farm to table movement, which has always been going on in other parts of the world because it's natural. But here it was, a farmer was coming to my back door and offering me carrots and beets and said, could I use them? And this was the beginning of kind of my career trying to cook seasonally and from the land and mostly plants. And back then, learning more about the Mediterranean diet. So when we think about Blue Zones, we're thinking about Dan Buettner's experience around the world and finding where people are living longer. And one of those main areas is Crete in the Mediterranean. So if I was to give anybody a high level advice for what is Blue Zones and how should I eat here in Hawaii, thinking about the Mediterranean diet as a key towards what to do in your kitchen. The Mediterranean diet focuses on whole foods, less animal meat, more legumes, green vegetables, seeds, healthy fats like olive oils and avocados, more hydration. It does promote a little bit of a red wine or wine in general. So that's kind of an overview of what I wanted to talk about in terms of our relationship with Blue Zones. I'm open to take questions and any specific questions around the Blue Zones diet or the Blue Zones course or the concept. I'm open for questions.
All right, just go ahead and put your questions in the chat box, and then we can read it out loud.
Okay. Yeah, nothing in the chat box yet. So I know a big thing about being healthy and living long is about what you eat. And a lot of what we promote and what I've been promoting over the years is food is medicine. And one of those things is meat in moderation. So if there's a takeaway from this call, it would be mostly plants, meat in moderation. I'd like to say eliminate processed foods and fried foods, but let's just say minimize processed foods and fried foods. A lot of the American diet and our obesity epidemic and our high, cardiovascular disease and a lot of the disease-specific diets do come from the diet that America has developed with the fast food nation and so forth. So in general, when you're thinking about cooking for yourself, simple techniques, Mediterranean diet, whole foods. When I do my shopping, when I'm going to the grocery store, the first place I go is to the produce section. And I kind of shop for my meals based on mostly plants. So I do go to the produce section and load up on my mostly plants. And then I'm going to my pantry section. And I'll get my nuts and my legumes and my grains and my pastas if I need it. And then I'll finally end up maybe in the meat section if I'm going to need any animal protein. But personally, I've been cooking more plant-based and keeping my proteins as a combination of legumes and grains. So most of my meals will always have a grain like a rice or a legume like a dal, and keeping that in mind for complete proteins. So the more plants, the more hydration, less limiting the salt, and limiting the animal protein are some of the key points that I would recommend for increased nutrition as the beginning of changing your diet. The Blue Zones course that we do have is an online course, and I can provide the link here for that. It does go for the tune of $240. It's a 20-hour course. It is supported by our chefs and our team in terms of some of the upload activities for recipes that you might do and take pictures of and upload and get graded. But it's focused on consumers. It's focused on changing the way people eat to understand a high level way of changing your habits. So can I give you some specific examples of recipes you suggest? Great question, Ian. One of the things we like to promote is the concept of technique. So once you've learned a certain technique, and then you can take some of the vegetables or the foods that you like and look up recipes for that. So I would say that for a recommendation on a recipe for like the Sardinia area, minestrone with fennel and garlic. That's one of the recipes in the Blue Zone garlic course. But minestrone on its own, and if you look this up as a recipe online, it's typically going to be carrots, onions, garlic, spinach, beans, chickpeas, vegetable stock, maybe topped with a little bit of Parmesan and olive oil. But those are all representative vegetables, healthy fats, legumes, healthy oils, the olive oil. Minestrone is the main one. There's a lot of things that you might think as a recipe, but we would consider it a quick saute. So a quick saute of bok choy with ginger and garlic and olive oil, or a quick saute of spinach with olive oil, chili flakes, and garlic as a side dish. We did promote a couple of recipes, and I did a lot of the filming for these recipes. So our company didn't do any new content throughout COVID, but the first content that we started doing was in February 22. And I'd say that half the recipes within this course are my hands. There's no faces, but I'm doing the kind of the work. We did spaghetti with a walnut pesto, which pesto usually is going to be walnuts, basil, olive oil, garlic, Parmesan, and adding that to spaghetti is a great dish. We did a risotto, porcini mushroom risotto or a shiitake mushroom risotto, and this is the concept of learning the technique of making a risotto, but incorporating fresh mushrooms, sauteed mushrooms into it. So that's an example of some of the recipes. I would suggest I don't have a list of all of the recipes. The course itself has about 36 recipes, but one thing we try to do is teach you technique along the way so that when you are looking at other recipes in the future, you say, oh, I look at this recipe and I can understand that it has 3 techniques. We have a blanch, a saute, and a simmer. And once you understand those terms, recipes will come a little bit more naturally. So I do have a question, Lei, from you. How much does it cost to attend the course? The course works where you would be enrolling, and I'm pretty sure it's $249 that I'm looking at the price. And once you have access to the course, you have access to the course for a lifetime. So if you're going to go through it and watch the videos, we have recipe videos. So each of the recipes has a video to walk you through the steps in addition to the written recipe. And then each of the 8 units has an introduction from Dan Buettner talking about that region, be it Italy or Greece or Okinawa, and talking about his experiences there and what he learned high level. So doing a presentation on a Zoom meeting does not do justice what the course does, and having Dan Buettner himself talking about his life experience being in the different regions. Steve, you have a question on my thoughts on carbs. Well, that's a loaded question. I would say that I like to keep my carbs unprocessed. So if I'm going to do a pasta, I might do a whole wheat pasta versus a white pasta. I will try to, in my breads, incorporate whole wheat in my breads. I tend to be making sourdough kind of on a regular basis. And yes, I did start this during COVID. And yes, I was a chef wondering why is everybody making sourdough? I'm like, well, why don't I make sourdough? But I tend to do a third of my flour as a whole wheat flour. So I would say if we're talking about carbs, we want to think of healthier carbs that have a low glycemic index, meaning white potatoes, russet potatoes are not the healthiest. And if you eat them on their own, like French fries or hash, you get a spike in your glycemic index, which is not good for your blood pressure and cholesterol in the long run. So I would choose a sweet potato, or if I'm going to mix potatoes and do a hash of some sort, I would mix it with onions and peppers and other vegetables so that I don't have pure potatoes. I stay away from white bread across the board. I would say Wonder Bread is the worst, but if I'm going to go with bread, I'm buying Dave's seed bread. I mean, that is very healthy. So when I consider carbs, I do have carbs. I'm limiting my carbs. I'm very active. I'm paddling 4 or 5 times a week. I tend to burn a lot of calories, but most of these carbs are coming from grains and legumes. So I've actually set up my kitchen where I have jars of many different kinds of grains and rices and grains and legumes. So at any moment, I might be able to make a sauteed yellow dal, or a little dal soup, or black rice, or azuki beans, but so that I have variety and that it's a habit that it's sitting there on the counter. Visually, I can kind of create my carbs to go with my vegetables or my animal protein by having a mixture of better carbs. That's my message. Do I use meat substitutes like Impossible Burger? I do. I actually had a grilled hot dog last night. I wouldn't call it a hot dog, but a grilled sausage last night on sourdough with sauerkraut. So it was a vegan sausage from Whole Foods on my own sourdough with a little bit of sauerkraut. Sauerkraut being a probiotic, and thinking about having those pickled items and kimchi, those types of things in your fridge as something that's a regular thing in your diet. So I have tried Impossible Burger and I have tried Beyond Meat. Both tend to be getting a little better in terms of flavor. I'm not sure if I'm really keen on the process of how they're making these two things. I was at the National Restaurant Association show in May in Chicago, and plant-based products are the rage. There was probably 20 different operations and companies that have just come out in the last year or two that are promoting plant-based products. What I found is that the ones are made out of a ferment, of a mushroom ferment, or of and then gluten, being naturally created, as opposed to something grown in a lab like Impossible Burger, taking the DNA of an animal and kind of growing it. I'm going to be attracted to more of that for a meat substitute, something that has been naturally created from a mushroom or a gluten. How do you make sure you're getting adequate protein if you're focused on plant-based eating? Scott, this is a classic question. Are you getting enough protein because you're not eating animal meat? I focus on the combination of grains and legumes on a daily basis. So I've kind of got to feel that I'm about 200 pounds and I'm going to want about 150 grams of protein per day. So mentally, when I'm eating, I'm looking at that meat substitute or my grain combination. And I'm definitely thinking about, am I getting enough protein? So once you have a combination, or you understand what the combination will give you in terms of your amino acids and your protein, you'll say, well, I just sat down and had a plant-based meal and I got 26 grams of protein out of this way. And I could have sat down and had a grilled chicken thigh and had the same 26 grams. So it's about understanding the protein content in the different ingredients to make sure that you're getting that. And I'm not saying I don't eat meat. Every once in a while, I will have a steak, and I'm cooking for my kids. And they're always going to say, what are we having for dinner? They will go plant-based, but a lot of times it's going to be the chicken or the meat or the fish. I tend to eat meat on a few times a week. So I'm not thinking, oh, I'm not getting enough protein. I do supplement my protein with plant-based protein shakes. So I do have a protein powder that I have on a regular basis to start my day to make sure I've got my 20 to 30 grams to start my day. Thanks, Scott, for the question. Is there a list of Oahu restaurants, plate lunch places that offer vegetarian food options? Jesse, I don't have a list off the top of my head for vegetarian options. I know that a couple restaurants that I do like that are not plate lunch will focus on vegetables as the highlight. There's Fat in Chinatown. I've been following them since they opened. The chef just won a James Beard Award last year. But when I go to that restaurant, I can go through the menu and find vegetable-based items that look tasty and are satisfying. So Steve, another question here. Restaurants in Honolulu that serve food consistent with our program. Once again, kind of like looking at recipes, I'm not sure if I could look at a restaurant and say these restaurants are serving consistent. It would be more about understanding the concept of plant-based eating or the concept of a Mediterranean diet and the types of ingredients that go into it, so that you can go into any restaurant and take a look at the menu and say, well, there's steak and potatoes, it's a steak and it's a white potato. I'm going to stay away from that. On the side, they have a spinach salad with toasted pecans and pickled onions. 3 good things: a dark leafy green, a nut, and a pickled allium or onion. So it's more about understanding the ingredients and seeing if the restaurant is representing those ingredients. Another question from Scott. What are your favorite vegan meat products? I don't know the brand name of it, but there are these little breakfast sausages that I buy at Whole Foods in Kailua that tend to have great flavor and great texture. But yeah, no brand name off the top of my head. Ian, great question. Do you incorporate intermittent fasting into my program? I would say yes, that I tend to start my day light with water, coffee, maybe some fruit. And then I really don't have a meal until lunchtime. So between noon and 8 is my eating time. And then after 8, I'm not going to eat anymore. I'm mostly, drinking water. And then I have that time. So I've incorporated it into my lifestyle as a habit, not as into a program. So I would say mostly plants, less meat, healthy greens, healthy grains, combinations that make up your protein, and hydration, hydration, hydration. I worked with a company, the startup that was in San Francisco, strange name. It was called Zipongo. It's now called Food Smart, but their tagline was "Eating well made simple." And their concept was providing a platform with hundreds of thousands of recipes that you could sort through with your preferences to the recipes that you wanted. And then you can pick those recipes and get those ingredients into a shopping cart to Instacart or Amazon Fresh to be delivered to you. And this platform was used by a lot of the companies that we worked for or worked with, from Disney to Nestle to Google. Not sure where I was going that with fasting, but yeah, the concept of making a habit to have these healthy ingredients around. So the way I shop is I'm basically having my standards, my non-perishables, my grains, my legumes, my olive oils, my soy sauce, any of my seasonings stocked up. And then when I'm shopping, I tend to just go and grab my fresh greens, my fresh fruit, and some animal protein if I need it. So from Charlene, Hawaii County is the first Blue Zone certified county. We have lost some ground when we lost Blue Zone staff to support the Power 9 groups. Can we get a link to your course and recipes? Yes, let me pull that up as I'm here. All right, Desmond, do you want to take anybody off mute? Does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, is there any more questions that anyone wants to ask? Put in the chat box. If not, yeah, if not, then I think we're I think you can move on. We can either move on, or yeah.
Yeah, we can move on. Charlene and everyone else, I will share a follow-up email that has a little bit more detail to Desmond, as opposed to putting it in the chat. That will let you see how to sign up for the course, a little bit more about the recipes that are in the course, the overview and the syllabus, so that you can take a look at this after this call. Well, Ian, thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope that you receive some good information out of this short presentation.
All right, Ian, do you want to give us some final thoughts?
Yeah, Travis, excuse me, I was having a hard time unmuting. Well, Scott, thank you very much for doing this. I can attest to having, I spent a lot of time with Scott paddling, and he really does live this lifestyle, and as a group of people who spend time with him are very, very healthy and well on their way to living to be 100. So I urge everyone to try to adopt this. Thanks very much for attending, and we'll come up with something new again.
Thanks everyone for your time this afternoon.